What's up, psychedelic investors? My name is James, and you're watching The Psychedelic Investor. In today's episode, we will be discussing Compass Pathways, ticker symbol CMPS, by many standards the most advanced company in the psychedelic medicine space. Backed by legendary billionaire investor Peter Thiel, known for roles in PayPal, Facebook, and Palantir, the company aims to revolutionize mental health care using psychedelic-inspired medicines. And Compass has an ambitious first project. They are attempting to treat depression with psilocybin, the active ingredient in magic mushrooms. So I'm excited about doing this episode because Compass Pathways is a company that excites me, both as a company and an investment. So, in this video, we're aiming to understand the essence of Compass and get an overview of the company. To do this, we're going to cover 5 topics. First, what is the problem that Compass Pathways is trying to solve? Second, we'll discuss their clinical trial, treating treatment-resistant depression with psilocybin. Third, who are the main people behind the company? Fourth, we'll talk about the financials. And finally, we'll discuss whether or not Compass is a good investment for you. Oh, and stick around until the end of the video to hear a hilarious fun fact. But first, if you enjoy this video, invest in the channel with your like and subscribe. Over time, you'll see your investment grow as we continue to bring you quality content on the psychedelic medicines field. Enjoy the video. To what problem is Compass Pathways trying to be a solution? Well, in their first program, Compass will be researching how psilocybin therapy can help people with treatment-resistant depression. Put plainly, the company is researching whether psilocybin is effective in treating depression, specifically in people who have undergone at least 2 to 4 other types of treatment without success. So, before we look at how effective psilocybin is at treating depression, we first have to explore depression. What is it? How big of a problem is it? And how effective are current treatments? So, to start, depression, more properly called major depressive disorder, or MDD, is a common and serious medical illness that negatively affects how you feel, the way you think, and how you act. It can cause feelings of sadness and or loss of interest in activities you once enjoyed, and it can lead to a variety of emotional and physical problems and can decrease your ability to function at work and at home. Some common symptoms are feeling sad, trouble sleeping, loss of energy, feelings of worthlessness, difficulty thinking, and, in the extreme, thoughts of death and suicide. So, something that is important to note is that there are many different types of depression, such as persistent depression, manic depression, also called bipolar disorder, seasonal affective disorder, postpartum depression, and many more. And I only mention this to highlight the fact that depression is extremely varied in almost every way. It varies in the symptoms that are presented, the severity and frequency of said symptoms, and what causes them. And speaking of the causes, no one knows exactly what causes depression, although it appears to be an illness that may result in the interplay of many different biological and environmental factors. A couple of biological factors may be the biochemistry in your brain and your personal genetics. So, thanks for that, nature. Some environmental factors include past traumas like abuse and the death of a loved one. It is important to note that drugs, either prescribed or recreational, especially if abused, can also cause depression. So, as well as being serious, depression is also very common. According to the National Institute of Mental Health, in 2017, around 17.3 million adults in the USA, which is about 7% of the population, suffered from a major depressive episode. So, just to summarize, depression is not just being sad, it can be a debilitating illness that destroys the victim's life. The causes and types can be varied, and therefore, there is no one-size-fits-all treatment. And speaking of treatments, how is depression currently treated? Well, currently 2 methods are used, usually in conjunction with each other: therapy and medication. Focusing on the medication, the 2 most common types, though there are many others, are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SSRIs, and serotonin and norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors, or SNRIs. The way these drugs work is by following this oversimplified philosophy. There are 3 main chemicals that are active in your brain: norepinephrine, serotonin, and dopamine. Some research shows that in the brains of people affected by depression, the circuits that use these chemicals don't work well. Therefore, the solution is to rejig those chemicals so that the brain functions better. And here it is important to note that researchers don't understand exactly why this process improves mood. The brain is still a mystery after all. So, how effective are they, and are there any serious side effects? Well, opinions vary on how effective antidepressants really are, but the general consensus is that the more severe the patient's depression, the more effective the treatment. That is to say that those suffering from only mild depression, the SSRIs and SNRIs won't work as well as for those with serious cases. Several studies show that within 6 to 8 weeks of taking antidepressants, 40 to 60% of people show an improvement, although 20 to 40% of people taking a placebo said the same thing. So, in general, we can say that for most people, particularly those with extreme depression, current treatments are at least somewhat effective. However, they are definitely not a solution for everyone. For example, about a quarter of people taking antidepressants had a relapse within 2 years. As for side effects, these fall into two categories: relatively common and benign, and more rare and serious. In the first category, examples include dry mouth, headaches, dizziness, and restlessness. In the second, more serious category, we have heart problems, epileptic fits, or liver damage. And a specific issue arises in teenagers who, several studies have shown, actually think about and attempt suicide more frequently on SSRIs and SNRIs than they do while not using these drugs. So, to take a step back, we can see that current treatments for depression are somewhat effective. They do help millions of people. However, there are many people for whom drugs like SSRIs and SNRIs just don't work. People in this category include teenagers and those with mild depression. Furthermore, for some people with serious MDD, treatment just doesn't work. We call this treatment-resistant depression. For example, this study here shows that about 30% of people who get treated for MDD have treatment-resistant depression. And just as a quick side note, you may notice that some studies show different stats than other studies. For example, this study says 30% of people with MDD are treatment-resistant, whereas the one I just mentioned said about 20% of people relapse when using SSRIs and SNRIs. That doesn't mean that one study is wrong. You just have to look at all their findings as ballpark figures and combine all the available data to try to get a holistic, complete picture. So, another issue is that for those taking the medications, while they may no longer feel depressed, many report feeling less than all there emotionally. In other words, for many people taking drugs like SSRIs and SNRIs, though they are not depressed, they are kind of also in an emotional fog. So, perhaps this is an improvement from where they were, but it's not necessarily a complete win. So, we can clearly see that our current treatments for depression aren't perfect. Perhaps we don't have to throw out the whole system. After all, it does work on millions of people. But we do need to find a solution for the millions of people for whom SSRIs and SNRIs just don't work. Enter psilocybin. Before we can get the Compass Pathway study, let's first look at the literature on the subject. Compass didn't just randomly decide to run this program for no good reason. They did it standing on the shoulders of those who came before them. So, we'll start with the Beckley Foundation. They gave psilocybin to 20 individuals with treatment-resistant depression. All patients had previously tried at least 2 other forms of treatment and had suffered from depression for an average of 18 years. So, to be clear, this group of people had both severe depression and long-lasting depression, though it is a small sample size. Each patient received 2 doses of psilocybin, 7 days apart, and they had psychological support before, during, and after each session. Follow-up exams took place after 5 weeks, 3 months, and 6 months. So, looking at the result highlights, we can see some interesting stats. We see here that all patients showed some reductions in their depression scores at 1 week post-treatment, and maximal effects were seen at 5 weeks, with results remaining positive at 3 and 6 months. They continue with, the drug was also well tolerated by all participants, and no patients sought conventional antidepressant treatment within 5 weeks of the psilocybin intervention. Looking at the why and how this worked, Beckley states that psilocybin may effectively reset the activity of key brain circuits known to play a role in depression. Now, there is an extremely interesting passage that I am going to read in its entirety here. So, as part of this study, patients were shown faces with particular emotions, and their brains were scanned to see how they reacted. Activity in this brain region was stronger in response to being shown fearful faces after the psilocybin session than it was in response to those fearful faces beforehand. This means that psilocybin actually enhances the response to negative emotional stimuli. Now, this sounds surprising. We'd imagine that the successful antidepressant medication would reduce or dampen such activity. But the team actually found that the strength of this increased response was correlated with greater improvement. This implies that psilocybin-assisted therapy treats depression by enhancing emotional responsiveness. The researchers make some fascinating observations from their interviews that were conducted with the patients in this trial that helps explain these findings. Many of these patients said that they attributed the effectiveness of the treatments to a greater willingness to accept all emotions. Many went so far as to say that they felt that previous depression treatments had worked to reinforce emotional avoidance and disconnection. The psilocybin experience itself, by contrast, had precipitated an emotional confrontation, a challenging return to old traumas that had led to emotional breakthrough and resolution. The therapeutic process that was by no means easy or pleasant was nevertheless felt to have been pivotal to achieving a therapeutic transformation. So, we can see here that based on Beckley's study at least, using psilocybin to treat treatment-resistant depression not only may be quite effective, it also works in a very different way than SSRIs and SNRIs, and we will link the full study below for nerds like me who want to take a deep dive. Another study, this one done by Johns Hopkins University, found that the magnitude of the effect we saw was about 4 times larger than what clinical trials have shown for traditional antidepressants on the market. Alan Davis, PhD, and professor at Johns Hopkins, said this: "Because most other depression treatments take weeks or months to work and may have undesirable effects, this could be a game changer if these findings hold up in future gold standard placebo-controlled clinical trials." Another member of the study and fellow professor, Roland Griffiths, also a PhD, said this: "Because there are several types of major depressive disorders that may result in variation in how people respond to treatment, I was surprised that most of our study participants found the psilocybin treatment to be effective." So, to me, this is extremely significant, because as we talked about earlier, there are many different types of depression, and a medication that could work effectively on all of them would be a game changer. And as a quick note, this was also a small study with only 24 participants, all of whom, again, had a long history of depression and who had tried other medications in the past. Like the Beckley Foundation study, 2 doses of psilocybin were given a week apart, with therapy before, during, and after each session. A key finding in the study was that for the entire group of 24 participants, 67% showed a more than 50% reduction in depression symptoms at the 1-week follow-up, and 71% at the 4-week follow-up. Overall, 4 weeks post-treatment, 54% of participants were considered in remission, meaning they no longer qualified as being depressed. Now, there are actually many more studies by groups like MAPS that show similar results, but in the interest of time, we're going to stop here. What is important to note is 3 things. 1. Depression is widespread, serious, and deadly. 2. Current treatments, while somewhat effective, clearly aren't a perfect solution. And 3. There is at least some preliminary evidence, repeated by many institutions, that shows that psilocybin, the active ingredient in magic mushrooms, is more effective than current medication in treating depression. Which allows me to finally move on to Compass Pathways. Compass is the only for-profit company currently advanced in clinical trials proving the effectiveness of psilocybin to treat depression. They currently have a phase 2b trial looking at the effectiveness of psilocybin on people with treatment-resistant depression. So, here I just want to emphasize that when looking at companies in the psychedelic medicines field, or for any biotech really, the most important thing that you need to be looking at is their clinical trials. There are lots of companies that you can go to their website and you leave with the impression that they are doing great things and have lots of potential, but in reality, they aren't much more than pretty words. If the company doesn't have clinical trials advanced at least past phase 1, the company is, at best, aspirational. Now, at the moment, Compass is the only publicly traded company that has a phase 2b trial underway looking at the relationship between psilocybin and depression, which makes it very interesting as an investing opportunity. Furthermore, the company has received Breakthrough Therapy designation from the FDA, which basically allows them to fast-track many of the procedures the company has to take before getting certified to sell the drug. So basically, if any company is going to make it to market with psilocybin to treat depression, it is going to be Compass Pathways. So, looking at Compass's trial, they are testing 216 patients with treatment-resistant depression across 21 sites in Europe and North America. They are aiming to find the optimal dose of psilocybin and also the number and frequency of the sessions needed. In parallel with this, the company is developing their own protocols with their therapists to develop the best possible program. The way the program works now, there are 3 phases. The first phase is called preparation. In this step, the therapist and the patient get to know each other and they build a relationship so that they can trust one another. This is essential so that the patient feels at ease in the psilocybin session. And this, the psilocybin session, is the next phase. Here, the patient lies down on a bed in a comfortable room designed specifically for the session. They receive a dose of psilocybin in a capsule. During the experience, patients listen to a specifically designated music playlist and wear an eye mask to help them focus internally. The psilocybin experience typically lasts 6 to 8 hours. A therapist and an assisting therapist are present throughout the session. And finally, we have integration. Here, patients are encouraged to discuss the experiences of the psilocybin session. The goal is for patients, with guidance from their therapist, to generate their own insights and ideas from the experience to change unhelpful emotional and behavioral patterns. Something that is important to note is that the psilocybin is artificially produced by Compass, and they have their own proprietary compound which they have called COMP360. As well as using it in their own clinical trials, they sell this compound to other researchers and universities as well. So, for investors looking to invest in Compass Pathways, the advancement and success of this trial is the most important thing for you to watch. If the company is successful and moves forward towards phase 3 and ultimately commercialization, Compass will, at a minimum, get a first mover's advantage. Something that is important to note, however, is science is a slow-moving process. Any potential investors in the company must therefore be long-term investors. What matters here is the therapy that Compass is pioneering, and nothing that happens between now and the release of phase 2b data will really matter, probably. Compass aims to release this data towards the end of 2021, and then they will begin with phase 3 trials, which will likely take another 2 years. So again, this is a very exciting opportunity, but you have to have a long-term horizon. So, next up, let's jump into Compass Pathways team members. Though we have no time to discuss all of them, it's pertinent to discuss the origins of the 3 co-founders. First we have, and apologies in advance for absolutely butchering this name, Ekaterina Malievskaya, MD, who is actually married to another co-founder, George Goldsmith. She is the co-founder and chief innovation officer of Compass Pathways. Professionally, she has more than 20 years of experience in the medical field as a research professor at City University in New York and clinical instructor of medicine at Mount Sinai School of Medicine. Something essential to note here is that she has a personal stake in psilocybin research because her son suffers from treatment-resistant depression, and no current treatment has been able to alleviate the symptoms. So, her personal experience definitely serves as a great motivator to find a solution to TRD and accelerate research on psilocybin. Next, there's George Goldsmith, Chairman, Chief Executive Officer, co-founder of Compass, and Dr. Malievskaya's husband. Naturally, he also has a personal stake in psilocybin research because his son's treatment-resistant depression. Goldman's early training and experience was a multidisciplinary blending of cognitive psychology, clinical psychology, and computer science. Professionally, he's had a few entrepreneurial undertakings. Goldsmith combined his psychology education with computer sciences to form the Human Interface Group. The company was an early pioneer in collaborative software and was eventually acquired by Lotus Development. He also created Tomorrow Lab and Tapestry Networks. On top of that, he is serving on the board of directors for the drug discovery company, Anabios. Last but not least, there's Lars Wilde, who has a fantastically awesome name, by the way. Lars is President, Chief Business Officer, and co-founder of Compass Pathways, focusing on operations, digital health solutions, and fundraising. He's an active serial entrepreneur in tech and biotech, and he's a businessman investment angel. Just before joining Compass, Lars was the founder and CEO of Spring Lane, a leading European direct-to-consumer kitchen and barbecue brand and the largest German cooking magazine. Amongst other buy and build investments, he focused on building Viva Neo, the largest European in vitro fertilization group providing patients with cutting-edge medical solutions. Lars also has a personal stake in psilocybin therapy. Just like co-founders Goldsmith and Malievskaya, Wilde's involvement with Compass stems from his personal experience of dealing with depression. He has suffered from TRD and generalized anxiety disorder himself, and he has had the privilege of accessing a treatment with psilocybin that has helped him treat these diseases. This is one of the main drivers to prove psilocybin's efficacy in treating TRD through clinical trials and to make it legally available to most people. So, I really like a few things here. First and foremost, the company is founder-owned and operated. This is a huge plus for me. You want the people running the company to be the ones with the vision. Once they leave and the suits come in, as I've said before, the magic leaves. Second, the leaders are scientists, and an all-star team at that. If you have a medical company, you want the leaders to be medical doctors and scientists, not accountants and lawyers. Third, this is a company on a mission greater than money. All three founders have had personal experiences either directly or with their son with major depressive disorder. They believe in the capacity for psilocybin to help people as it has helped Lars, and as Meliaveskia and Goldsmith hope it will help their son. The leaders believe in creating a better world, which is a marker of great companies, like with Tesla and Elon Musk. The last thing we'll be looking at before discussing whether Compass is a good investment is the financials. So before we start, I just want to talk about the nature of Compass and many biotechs like it. Compass Pathways is currently at the research and development phase of its existence. It really isn't selling anything yet, and therefore it won't be making any profits. What is most important for a company at this phase is to have enough funding and cash on hand to sustain its research and pay for its staff. Furthermore, it is important that the company be able to raise new capital easily when the need arises. So, with that in mind, let's dive in. CMPS currently has a market cap of around $1.62 billion, and all currency is in American dollars, by the way. And this is very important because with its relatively high market cap, the company will be able to raise capital fairly easily if and when it decides it needs to. And as a side note, if they do this, that is not a bad thing. Yes, shares are being diluted, but that is the nature of the game. At this early phase of being a biotech, that's just how it works. Most importantly, the company, as of the end of Q3 2020, has around $196 million on hand. In that quarter, the company burned just under $17 million. So just doing some very rough back-of-the-napkin math, if the company sustains its current expenses, it has enough money for 11.5 quarters, or almost 3 years. So this is very encouraging. It means Compass can do the work it needs to do without having to constantly be groveling for money. However, I will note that I expect that as the company grows and hires more people, and as they start to expand to new projects, their budget will also increase. So, taking a step back, Compass Pathways seems to be in a very healthy financial position. They have a war chest large enough to weather any... Bye, Gloria! Continuing. So, taking a step back, Compass Pathways seems to be in a very healthy financial position. They have a war chest large enough to weather any storm that comes their way. And one more thing to note is that a big part of their cash came from none other than Peter Thiel. Thiel now owns 7.54% of Compass, and this is important because Thiel isn't just some random billionaire. He has a history of choosing paradigm-shifting companies. He helped change the world of payments with his investment into PayPal, Elon Musk's first claim to fame, making money digital. He helped change the way we interact with each other with his backing of Facebook, and he is now aiming to change how our data is used with his investment into Palantir. And now, his investment into Compass may change the way we treat mental health. His involvement in the company, if only as an investor, is a huge plus for the company. If for no other reason, his involvement will attract other investments and keep the stock price high. So, Compass was obviously a good investment for Peter Thiel, but is it a good investment for you, the retail investor? And the answer to that comes down to this. If Compass's clinical trials are successful, and if they are able to push it through phase 3 trials and ultimately commercialize a product/procedure, then yes, Compass will be a very good long-term investment. The current annual market in the US to treat depression is around $15 billion and growing. If Compass has a more effective solution than SSRIs and SNRIs, which it appears they do, then they should have no problem eating up some of that market. Even if they get 1/15 of that, which, with a superior product, shouldn't be that hard to do, the company would have a revenue of $1 billion. Give it a 10x sales to market cap ratio, and we could say that the Compass would have around a $10 billion market cap, around 6 times larger than it is now. Now, this isn't including the European market, or the rest of the world for that matter. So, again, all that matters to retail investors is how effective the trial turns out to be. If it is effective more so than SSRIs and SNRIs, the company is a strong buy. If it isn't, well, better luck next time. Personally, I put a little bit of money into the company, about a quarter of what I put into MindMed. I did this both because it is an exciting company, and if it explodes before clinical trial results are released, I don't want to miss out. However, I did this also as a way to keep myself up to date on the company. I impulse check updates on the companies that I am invested in. So when one piques my interest, I usually put in a small position. And just a reminder guys, I am not a financial advisor. Please do your own due diligence into the company before buying a stock. I really like the company and it fits my goals and risk tolerance, but that may not be the case for everybody. So, just to recap, the most important factor in whether Compass Pathways is a good investment is how effective their psilocybin treatment for depression turns out to be. In relation to the effectiveness of SSRIs and SNRIs, we will have to wait, at a minimum, until their Phase 2b trial results are released before we can make that call. Although, I will remind you that other actors have done similar trials with very positive results. So, I am betting on Compass. And now, time for a fun fact. But first, if you enjoyed this episode, leave a like, smash that subscribe button, and ring the notifications bell. Also, tell us in the comments section which topics you'd like us to cover in the future. It will really help with the algorithm, and will ensure that this channel keeps growing so you can keep getting essential information on the psychedelic medicine sector. So, the fun fact. Did you know that some people believe that a lot of our Santa Claus iconography that we have stems from magic mushrooms? No, really. In the 1600s in Siberia, for the winter solstice, shamans would dress like the Amanita muscaria mushroom, which is red and white. These shamans would give gifts in late December, and because houses were often blocked by snow, they would enter from the roof. Now these mushrooms grew almost exclusively under pine trees, and attracted, you guessed it, reindeer, who, after eating the shrooms, would certainly be flying. So, to recap, at the end of December, Siberian shamans in the Arctic dressed in red and white, and after picking shrooms from under a pine tree with flying reindeer, would go from house to house and enter through the roof to give their gifts. You decide. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and while you're here, why not check out my favorite company in this field, MindMed. I'll see you next time.